All right, next up we have Laura Hartema. She's a senior ecologist with King County's Water and Land Resource Division. For 25 years, she has worked on the design, implementation, monitoring, and maintenance of restoration and mitigation projects. She's also the author of Bering Sea Strong, How I Found Solid Ground on Open Ocean, an inspirational adventure memoir about overcoming adversity. She's here to talk about the effects of pole diameter on willow performance over 5 years.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? So thanks for having me today. Again, I'm going to be talking about how willow diameter affects survival and growth in reed canary grass wetlands. So many times as practitioners, we are sent out into the field and we have to come up with a planting scheme for a project. And you get out into the field, and this is what you see. So Josh, thank you for your presentation and segueing into my nemesis, reed canary grass. So really what we're trying to do is we're always thinking about cost effectiveness and what's the best way to establish woody cover in this case, and do what's best for the site and also save money. But as we know, it is expensive to do a lot of maintenance effort and a lot of site prep. So for this site, this was not a mitigation project or a restoration project. This was solely a small planting that we did, and we did this experiment just to see, well, we didn't have any performance standards, so we might have done it differently if we had, if we needed other species and such. So what we wanted to do was achieve high woody cover, and how can we do that with the least amount of treatment? And then, is it possible to just plant this and walk away? And then what would it cost to achieve performance standards if we did have performance standards? So as we know, site prep is costly, maintenance is costly, and there's all kinds of things that we can do. And I think it's important to really pay attention to what's, in other words, not going out there and just doing everything. We can stomp and we can herbicide and we can mow and we can weed whack and we can mulch it and we can do all these things. But really, what are the things that really are attributing to the success? And so sometimes I think we need to piece these things out and really test the treatment the maintenance treatment that we're using to see if that's really the reason that it's successful. So Josh mentioned mulch. Mulch is very effective at retaining moisture, but you really do have to consider where it is in a floodplain. This site, this is not this particular site that we did the study on, but this is really common. And a lot of our projects, we are wanting to have that floodplain interact with the site. And so adding a lot of mulch can be considered fill in a floodplain, and so often we're not able to even do such a thing. So we have to be careful of water quality, and so sometimes mulch, particularly we're planting these, prior to the flood season. Now, fabric is super effective. There's no doubt that fabric works. It absolutely works. It helps retain moisture. It's awesome against things like reed canary grass. But you also have to think of the cost. So there's a huge cost in putting it down. People think there's no maintenance, but you really do have to maintain it if it's in a floodplain, because you're going to get deposition, you're going to get wood debris racked up, and you'll have to take that off. You can also use the little squares, but by the time you do your dense planting, you're still going to have to maintain those. And then the big thing is that a lot of this fabric gets, it's hard to reuse it, it tears it. And then you have to also make those holes bigger by probably about year 3. And then often it just winds up in a landfill. So there is an ecological cost to that too, but it works. You should always consider your access. So getting in and out of your site. A lot of these projects, we're trying to reconnect the floodplain. So you might even have more water on your site than you did initially when you planted it. So you have to think about where you're going to plant, how far you have to carry this material, and then how are you going to get, if you were going to transport fabric out of the site or bring things in, you just have to make sure you can get in there easily enough. So the study objectives for this were to determine whether survival and cover of Sitka willow poles planted in reed canary grass differs between size classes. And then out of those that we used, which diameter was the most cost effective? And then could you have success without prep or maintenance on this site? And then we looked at the 3 versus year 5 results. So the site conditions were, we were in Enumclaw, so lower Newaukum Creek, and it's a monoculture of reed canary grass, full sun. It's annually floods. The water table is really high, close to the surface. Really silty soils. So that's an important thing to know too, because as you're staking, if you get gravelly soils, it takes a lot longer. It's a lot more difficult to get them established. So yeah, so this is pretty much it, right? Reed canary grass, some sedges and rushes mixed in, but mostly solid reed canary grass for acres. So we kept the design really simple. We'd use completely randomized design, 30 plots, 15 by 30. Another plot size I like to use is 25 by 25. And the reason for that is so that when you walk through, you can really see everything in the plot. I think that's pretty essential to have. I really like that size plot. And then with this, we did 50 stakes per plot and planted them. So we tried to take out all the variables, do everything exactly the same. And planted them 18 inches deep. And then these were the 3 sizes, small, medium, and large. And really the big difference is that the skinny ones you can pretty much get in a nursery rather readily and easily, where the larger ones have to be cut out in the field. And then our response variables were cover and survival. And if you look over here to the right, that's just like a rope strap wrapped around the pole, and that just shows you how easy it was to get these plants in the ground. Sometimes, like I said, if you have to auger them in, it's a huge difference in your labor costs. It takes a lot longer. This is our plot layout. This we did shared, so each of these points at the corners had a T-post, so we had shared lines in the plots, and each of the colors is a different treatment. So A, B, and C, meaning the different size categories. So 30 plots total, 10 plots of each size. And we did this because we didn't want to take up too much space. We just did this as a subset of a bigger planting. And it really only took up about 1/3 of an acre. So you can get a pretty nice design with a small area. And you also don't want a lot of, you want it to be pretty uniform. You don't want a lot of, topography or a lot of difference. You want it to take out all the variables. So we did, it was about 1,500 stakes. This just gives you an idea of the size class. So this is small, 1 bundle, easily throw it over your shoulder. Medium, he's kind of smiling here. So that's the medium size. And then the large are the really biggies. And again, this the cost effectiveness that we did not include labor, but I think as you develop these studies, I think labor is a big part, and so that cost should also be worked in. And we didn't do that on this. We just didn't plan far enough ahead of time. But planting a pole like this is going to take a lot more than a little tiny one. So we use really simple, repeatable monitoring methods. Like I said, we used 4 T-posts, and then we crisscrossed the transect across. We did a point intercept for cover, and we use the densitometer here. So you go along, do your point intercept. Every hit, you mark it down, and you divide by the total number of your points, and that gives you the cover. And then the survival we just did in years 2 and 3, and that was simply bisecting the, and I really suggest doing it this way, is bisecting your plot and then have one person run down one half of the plot and one person run down the other half, and then they can switch sides and then come back, and you're getting a double count. So just to, it's surprising how hard it is to count to 25. Let's just say that. Yeah, so and then we only did survival in years 2 and 3. And really the reason is because those willows are basal branching, and so they're just sprouting off the bottoms. And by year 3, it's hard to get through, but also you just don't know where those stems are coming from. So year 3 is about all you want to do. The other thing is when you're planting these, you really want to make sure that you inset your stakes. You don't want them on the line, because then you're not going to know what plot they're in, and you want it to be really clear boundary as to what's in your plot. And this is particularly true if you're planting just a big huge area with other plants that could be encroaching into your plot also. Our results, this is some of the crew, and one of the results we got was that we had 13% of our plots had bald-faced hornet nests in them. So that was kind of hard. I think willow patches and bald-faced hornet nests go together. So they're smiling now, but we weren't when we were out there. We were all squealing and running, and it's just, you know, part of the dangers of the job. So here we are at year 3. So left to right, the small versus the large to the right, and then this is the survival. And so you can see that the large survived a lot better than the small. And I don't know if I would necessarily expect that, but that's what we found. And so had you had an 80% survival requirement for this, you would not have met it with the small, and you might have had to replant, versus the large and the medium. You would have made your requirement. And these error bars are not overlapping, so it was a statistically significant difference. So I think that's kind of cool. And then here we have cover by year 3. It's kind of reflective of the survival. So the more survival you have, the bigger and the higher your cover. And so here, again, the large had double the cover by year 3. And usually it takes a little bit for those plants to take off anyway, so I guess I would expect this. Oh, and going back to the survival, I think part of the reason that you might see higher survival, not only is there more storage of energy in those bigger stakes, and they can compete against that grass, right? That's all over the place. Part of it too is I think that there's things like flooding and racking up wood, and then you've got the animals, you've got all the elk coming in and rubbing on things and trampling things. And I think the smaller ones, they tend to snap off the tops, where the big ones, they just rub on them or ignore them. So I think the little ones can get more impacted by voles and by the elk. So I think that could be part of the problem, or not problem, but it's just the way it goes. So here, if you just look up at the sky here, this gives you a good picture of the canopy of what to expect. You can see all that reed canary grass. And again, this was no site prep, no maintenance. This is just going in and staking these plants. So there's a medium, and then there's the large. So here we have cover plotted against survival. And so the small is in blue and the red is larger. And so you go left to right, it's smaller to large. And you can see how the small ones are congregated at the lower end, and then the large are congregated up at the top end. And then the middle was just kind of spread throughout really. But ultimately the large did the best in year 3. So year 3 results, highest survival, highest cover by those larger stakes. But the disadvantages are that they're heavier to transport and they're harder to install. And so there's increased labor costs. So if you can't get into your site and you have to carry these across a really long way, I mean, we have, you know, huge projects or acres and acres. And so sometimes, and we've been known to put them in boats and carry them out to sites. So yeah, you have to figure all that out. But anyway, so I gave this presentation a couple of years ago and we had only had year 3 data. So I'm really happy that I'm able to do this today because now we can talk about year 5. So if you just stopped your data collection here at year 3, you'd say, hey, we have it all figured out. You have to use the big ones. But what happens when you keep collecting data? So how does the story change by year 5? Well, here we have small, medium, large, and our year 3 data is right there between like 215, 216, and you can see the spread in the size classes. There's a bigger size or bigger spread in cover. But as you get closer to year 5, then they converge. And they might have converged closer to year 4. I don't know because we only took data in year 5. But the story is that the small ones caught up to the big ones when it came to the canopy coverage. So that's kind of cool. But what about this reed canary grass, right? It's some people think you can shade it out, and I've not seen that happen yet when there's so much in the area. I mean, really, if you took a postage stamp of a site, you can maintain it. But if you've got acres and acres and acres around you and you're working on a big site, it's not as easy. But this is just to show you that you do nothing maintenance wise, and of course you're going to have high levels of reed canary grass, even with a full canopy. Now, when we're talking cost effectiveness, again, this is not including labor. This is just the cost of the plant. So this could change depending on what you get your materials for. I've even done it where I've had the crews go out and cut them and measure how long it took them to do it and what it costs per plant, and purchasing them winds up costing the same or less because it's just so much time and labor. But anyway, so to get back to this chart, so in year 3, if you looked at these results, you'd say, oh, well, yeah, the large, we've got the orange ones here on the right. We've got great cover, but it wound up costing more. Where if you were okay with this, almost 80% cover, that would have been probably the one you would have picked for year 3. But if you needed to achieve that big cover and survival, you probably would have had to go with the big ones, even though it would have cost you a lot more. So year 5, these two wind up converging. So up here, you're getting above 80% cover, but the smaller and medium ones wind up costing, the cost is less for the same amount of cover. So now you would say, oh, well, we should have just gone ahead and used the small ones. Again, this depends on your cost for your material and your labor, because the labor is not in here. So really, the size you plant depends on what your goal is and what your performance standards might need. Here, this was just a little planting. It had no permit requirements. We weren't trying to get a bunch of diversity in. We were just trying to get some established cover along the stream. So it was, yeah. So by year 3, you would have chosen the larger diameters if you need really quick cover and high survival, or if you want more of a guarantee that you're going to get it, you would probably choose those larger ones. I also, again, I think it's funny, I think the larger ones attract the elk because the elk like to rub on them, but they tend to also be able to withstand that and flooding and like bolt damage, because they're typically only getting one side of the pole. But if you're going to go to year 5 and you have the performance standard met at year 5, you could stick with the smaller diameter poles and get equal cover. So the caveats on this is you could get some edge effect the way we set up the design. So you're getting, anytime you do a big plot and then on the edge you have this encroachment of canary grass. So you're going to get that on the outside edge, but the inside is basically benefiting from the shade. And we only had that one little center. So it wasn't huge, but just so when you're setting up your experiments, these are all the kind of things to think about. And then just knowing that reed canary grass will continue to thrive under this type of canopy. And, again, I don't know where you can go in Enumclaw and not have reed canary grass all around you. So I think even if you did your plots and you maintain the outside edge, and that could help prevent the competition and the encroachment coming into the side. So maybe you just really beef up the edge with containing the reed canary grass. But if the reed canary grass was controlled within these plots, the results might have differed. You might have seen the small ones take off a lot faster, because really we're doing some other studies, and really it's the grass competition that is the biggest threat to plant survival and cover. And it's not water. Well, different study. I'll present that some other time. But anyway, so it might be different if the reed canary grass was controlled. And then I say, get out there and test this. I would love for each of you to go out and do your own study, the same study. You can do different variables, but so test if reed canary grass suppression methods change these results, and then also include the cost benefits. So if you're going to lay down fabric, we know that works. You probably don't need to test that. We already know that works, but it's a huge cost when you add it all up. Herbicide, fast and simple, but then what comes in afterwards, because sometimes you treat reed canary grass and then you come back and it's all jewel weed. So you're just replacing one bad thing for the other. And then be sure to use a large sample size. So this was great. We had 10 plots each, which is wonderful. But this was on a private property and it was really hard to access. And most of our sites are on public access. So there's always, I want to say always, vandalism. You've got the wildlife, you have the beaver, you have the voles, you have the elk. And so sometimes the small stakes get snapped over, the big ones get rubbed on, the voles are eating them. It's coming from all angles. And then there's flooding and debris racking and all this stuff. And there's trails. All of a sudden it'll be like the main, make sure when you put your plot in that you look for game trails and human trails and don't put your plot there. That's another thing. And then be really sure to use solid protocols and use trained staff to collect the data. Don't think it's easy, simple, and you can just use volunteers for everything. You can, but I would just say really be involved and have small groups. My first 2 data collections on this project were totally fine. Statistically different data. It was really good. And then I took some new crews out and I had 2 crews and I thought, we'll just tag team. And anyway, I thought they understood. And then afterwards I was looking at the data and I thought, wow, they're looking at, I don't know what it was wildly different. So we just decided we're not going to use that data. So I just think it's real important. You just can't, and especially when people are kind of new to it, and we want to raise people up, right? We want to teach and we want to guide people. So we want to use them, right? Because it's education and that's how we all learn, right? It's how I started learning. So don't be afraid to use them. Just maybe use a smaller group so you can really be involved and help them through. And then if higher species diversity is desired, you might just do a different planting approach or maintenance approach. And what I really encourage you guys to do is, so say you have, 5 acres, 10 acres, whatever. You have this huge site and you're developing this a planting plan for it. Well, I think it's really great if you take a design like this or a small design and make that as part of your project. So you do a stake study in the midst of your project, and then you do all the other great diversity and all that beyond your study. And I even think on this kind of planting, I mean, I know I'm not a big plant a giant willow patch, but there's some advantages to doing it this way. And what you can do is you can do a couple of these big patches of willows. You might mix in some dogwood. And then outside of those, because the nice thing is you can do this and you can walk away from it and you don't have to do any maintenance. And then what you do is you add your diversity over into some other plots or in between, you put in your Sitka spruce and your Oregon ash and your dogwood or whatever your species are. And then you focus your maintenance money on those areas rather than on the willows. And then you can also use some of those willows to move through other parts of your site. So that's just my 2 cents. So yeah, that's it really. I just want you all to get out there and do this kind of work and use controlled experiments to improve your results and then feed them back into project designs. It's how we all learn from each other, and then share it with the restoration community. I'm really thankful for this Zoom because I think we can reach a lot of people doing this, and you don't have to go to a conference, and not everybody is able to go to the conference because people can't pay for everybody to go to the conference. So I like this opportunity, and thanks for having me. And
thank you very much, Laura. There are some questions in the chat. The first one is, would wood straw be considered fill within the floodplain? It can do a better job of staying in place than mulch.
Let's see, wood straw. Yeah, I think if you're using a lot of it, I mean, because you can put in erosion control, right? And that's what I would consider wood straw. But if you're putting on layers and it's thick layers, then I would say no, I would say that is going to be considered fill. And it also depends on, I don't do the calculations for the fill versus excavated, but there's different bins, and I don't know what I'm talking about really in that department, but I just know that DLS considers if you put a lot of mulch on a floodplain and it's going to flood, that's comp storage. You're taking up storage for flooding, and they can consider that fill. But if you don't have permits,
there were a couple of questions about how wet the sites are. Are they wet or dry in the summer? And in particular, 4.5 feet of live stake above the ground must produce a lot of leaves with potential for desiccation stress. Did you see any signs of stress from too much above ground biomass?
On this site, no, not at all. It's very wet. I would say the water table in the summertime is within a foot of the surface, and it's even probably, within 6 inches at times. So, and it floods annually, but no, there was no stress or desiccation or anything on these plants. Mm-mm.
Was vole herbivory an issue?
I always check. There was not vole damage here. And I think because it's wet, I don't think the voles, I've seen more vole damage like drier sites and mulch. The voles love mulch. So mulched a little bit higher sites I've seen them on. I didn't see a lot of vole damage here. And the elk damage was more on the small ones where they snapped the tops or trampled them. So, and they didn't eat, I didn't see them eat a lot of them. And then I will say too about the density is nice when you do these really dense plantings, because I think that helps, like the big ones particularly, because the elk really like to rub on the bigger ones. And so when you plant them dense, they don't go in there with their antlers. They stay kind of more to the outside. So I think that's kind of a benefit. And I would even say, like, as a method of planting, you could potentially plant the outside really dense and then maybe put your diversity on the inside. Hey, I don't know.
Another question, how wet is too wet for willow planting? Does it need to dry out in the summer, or can there be standing water year round? And how much standing water is too much?
Well, Pacific willow is more, can take more standing water, but I think standing water year round, they're not probably going to make it.
Did you notice a difference in the vigor of the reed canary grass between the small, medium, and large diameter willow stakes over the span of the study?
I would say no. And we did take, point intercept, but at the same time, I mean, it's like 100% underneath under the canopy, but I do believe the density is less. I mean, I wish somebody would do a biomass study and check, but I'm guessing that it does help in long term. And I've seen it, it's like, okay, now it's a little shadier. Now the reed canary grass isn't as abundant. It's like it's there, but it's smaller. And so I think that's when you can come in and get more species in. But this idea that we can shade out reed canary grass, when it's in the surrounding area, I don't think is very realistic. And I think the permitting agencies are starting to realize that. I mean, you can do it. It just is a lot. It's a lot of effort. You have you have a 10-acre site. You're not going to go out there and hand remove it. You're not going to you can't put fabric over 8 acres. It's kind of here to stay. But I think the best thing is to get structure in there and get some diversity. And you basically want it to be self-sustaining,
There are a couple of other comments in the chat. Paul Cheragino says that Jesse Barham at the City of Olympia has installed 4 coffee bags around seedlings, 2 overlapping layers to get around 2 years of weed control in reed canary grass with no other treatment. So there's an idea. And another from Kay McMurray. I've had great success doing my plantings in December and January. Willows can handle very wet conditions. So that's getting back to the issue of wet is too wet. And Georgia Mitchell says that for sites with year-round standing water, Myricagale is likely the most appropriate native shrub species. So a lot of good ideas going around in the chat.